All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daniel Efaw. I am a security manager for a pharmaceutical company here in West Virginia. You can all probably guess that one. Today's talk a little bit about the cost savings of not terrifying your leadership. I don't know how many of you have worked with various departments. The first thing they do is they especially in your C-suite, they catch an advertisement walking down a hallway or at a conference, or somebody calls and says, hey, buy this new awesome sweet tool and nothing will ever go wrong again. Well, I hate to tell them that's not the case. But there is a ton of data that we sit on in the security realm that can change a lot of that. Everything from access control records to user behavior. And that's something we're going to address a little bit here. So on the business side of things, we're looking at just how we can save money and how we can improve the program. Security by nature is a non-revenue generating service. So how do we cut our costs, still provide the same service, and not lose people or equipment? Again, my name's Daniel. If you want to get a hold of me, you have LinkedIn. My Twitter account is Freakazoid. I'll go ahead and get this. Yes, I know, for everybody in the room that laughed, yes, that was the intended effect. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. What is the idea of this talk? It's approaching security from a business and data perspective. There's so much data that's generated every single day, everything from user logins to activity to access control records to when they're entering the building. And a lot of security departments, whether you're in the physical security realm or in the information security realm, sit on this data and you don't realize the value that it provides. There's no cost associated with it. All of it's generated by your users every single day, and you can detect trends as they're happening before they become an issue. It's not designed to be a hype talk. I have sat through many analytics talks that they're like, yes, buy our product. This will solve all of your issues. Buy this module, integrate this. That's not the idea behind this. The idea behind this is to give you the idea of how to best approach it and to how to even approach your leadership about implementing a program like this. And again, like I said, methods for achieving your goal. We'll cover some very basic mathematical terms. I'm not going to take a deep dive into it because, to be honest, there are times that I even get a little glazed over. I've got two quotes here. The first one I'll let you read. The second one kind of popped up across my Twitter feed, and it made me laugh, but it proves a point. That if you're not supporting the business needs and objectives, then you're not doing security. That you can't say that enough. I have met many security departments that impede business, and the very first thing that happens is that you have a clash. You have a clash between production, you have a clash between marketing, and there becomes an adversarial relationship with security, and people don't report things. They don't want security to be a part of it. They don't even take security recommendations seriously at that point. So the idea behind this is that instead of impeding the business, we start finding ways to support it through the data that the business generates. The average cost for a small company for a basic security program is around $3,000 annually. That is very basic hardware and around $1,000 a year in user training. And that's very basic. That's just to keep your users from, clicking links and sharing things and, accessing their personal Dropbox from the corporate network and taking files home that way. I've met a lot of agencies that tend to build their security defenses like the Maginot Line. It looks great. It sounds great when you sit down on a presentation. You're like, I have all this in place, but you miss one trend or one evolving threat, and it's no good anymore. I think the worst one was ransomware. Users are great about not clicking links, but they open up a PDF or open up a Word document from the CEO, and the next thing you know, hey, help desk, why is my computer blue, and why does it say I have to pay in Bitcoin? What's Bitcoin? And the solution to this is to find a way to balance between the need for security and what processes you have in place. So everyone wants the best perimeter defenses, best incident response, the best in-class solution for everything. But sometimes that's not possible. As a security practitioner, we live in the world that we have to justify everything we want to buy, everything we want to do, everything we want to invest in, whether it's headcount, whether it's education, whether it's a new network defense. So the solution that I've come up with is using the analytics on the data that we provide, or that we can generate and pull from within the business. There's no better way to know what your business is doing and what your users are facing than taking that data and utilizing it. In terms of a business case, again, we're always faced with justifying why we want to do what we want to do. I forget the statistic right offhand, but the amount of data that's generated by an individual on a daily basis is growing exponentially. Your users are no different. Everything from physical security records, such as access control badging, CCTV video, badge clearance assignments. I was just listening to talk not long ago about role-based access. You got to think of it on both sides. On the information security side, you have user activity, firewall traffic logs, download and transfer logs. You have all this disparate data that's everywhere. But if you compile it and you understand what your user's thinking, doing, behaving, then you start to understand ahead of time what kind of challenges you might face. If you've got a user that spends all this time, browsing personal web forums, it's likely that you're going to have to watch and make sure they don't pull something in. The other side of this is that you have to know what kind of insight you're looking for. If you're concerned about your information threats, or your information security, looking at the behaviors of your users. I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. The challenge that we face in security as a business is that a lot of businesses will pull all this data together, and I've been involved with it where a senior leader comes to you and they say, we have all this information, I want you to tell me something about our security program, tell us how to improve it. Those answers just don't bubble to the top. You have to know what question you're asking. Are you concerned about a physical issue? Are you concerned about a information issue? And we'll get into the use case here. More so if you're familiar with the Apple case in January of this year, actually, where the individual was reported by fellow employees for taking photographs of sensitive and proprietary documents while on duty. He was working on a self-driving car. And it kind of crosses both boundaries. We'll show you a little bit more about that. Again, the intended effect is you can't go from insights to actions if you don't have a data-driven culture, if you don't have some way of understanding everything that's collected, designed, everything that happens within that organization. That data contributes to a picture of your threat landscape. You start seeing users behaving differently. You start seeing employees behaving differently. You start seeing your high-risk employees who are on a performance improvement plan. All that information compiled together, you have the ability to create vast insights into what your potential threat may be. So the question is, we have all this data. What do we do with it? That's been a huge question across the board. There are several steps to building, designing a program. One is to figure out what data do you have and what can you do with it, and standardize the collection process. I've been in several organizations, or worked with several organizations that they just grab a whole bunch of data and throw it and say, look, we made a graph, how do we fix this? Well, that's great that all your employees sign on at 8:15. That doesn't tell me anything about your behavior or threat. Well, all of our users like to email their files home. Well, you probably shouldn't allow that too. Catalog the data and normalize it. one of the challenges with this data is it's nasty. Anybody who's worked with real-world data, it's ugly, it's misformed, it's free text a lot of time, which if you've had the joy of working with free text data, it's a jewel. And you have to have a common naming convention, ratings, weights, things of that nature. The reason for that is as we get a little further, we'll start looking at the models that you can build to predict behaviors and predict your threat landscape. Standardized methods for accessing it. I don't know about you guys, but there's nothing more irritating than emailing a Excel spreadsheet back and forth looking for revisions. Yeah, oh yeah, I've been in that place too. So which version did you send me? The one at 232. But I got one at 234. Is that the right one? No, that was 2 versions ago. Thanks, Outlook, for leaving that in my outbox. Utilizing a tool of choice to begin deciphering data. A lot of companies use proprietary tools. Again, the whole talk is not about being a vendor specific. Some use open source, Python, R. Some like to use Tableau. Some use Alteryx. There are a ton of ways to make sense of everything you're collecting. And finally, my favorite part is leveraging AI and machine learning to automate the process of the data. There is not a single sensible security practitioner or data practitioner who's going to ask you, hey, I know that we're generating 30 gigs of data a day in just user logs. I want you to sit down and make sense of it. That's not happening. I'll never get anything else accomplished. But the thing about it is that by leveraging these technologies and leveraging these algorithms and different processes, you have the ability to set flags and to catch user behavior as it moves even before it becomes an issue. Not just your hard, fast rules, like obviously blocking things like personal file sharing sites, but you start seeing, and again, we'll get a little further into it, you start seeing certain groups of users emailing files to themselves. Well, that's kind of odd. Why would they be emailing files to themselves? Then you start seeing this behavior happening, and it's not just a single red flag, but you see groups of things happening. And it also helps a little bit with reducing your false positives. So again, we'll go back to the users emailing files to themselves. Instead of flagging that as a security incident, you have the ability to go back and say, okay, we've had 30 users do this, and we see it happen every so often. We need to spend some time figuring out why they're doing this and some user education. So the use cases. Again, user behavior analytics. That is a huge buzzword right now when it comes to the data and some of the software packages out there. Employee behavior. These two kind of feed into the third piece, the insider threat detection, and that's actually kind of what we're looking at more so than anything. Everybody looks for the logs of outbound connections coming in or DLP or any number of things, but they don't look at insider threats because they don't consider your average employee a major threat. Well, they've been good to go. We've not had any issues with them. We're not concerned about it. Even the most model employee can make bonehead mistakes and cause total chaos. You have ransomware, you have data loss. I mean, I've met some employees that think it's okay to clone their hard drive, their work machine, on their personal machine so they can take it home at night. Yeah, I've seen it happen. Or they, call the help desk and ask for a license for company proprietary software. That doesn't go so well. There's a lot of confused looks for that one. And it helps with protecting high-risk environment and proprietary information. I work in a manufacturing world, whereas there are locations that you're not just looking at physical access. You look at information access. You look at proprietary records. You look at research and development. You have a lot of people think by keeping research and development on a paper format, you reduce the risk of it walking out the door. Well, if you're not watching your employee behavior and watching your access records, it'll walk out the door and be reproduced before you realize it's gone. This works just the same for, again, user behavior. So, and real quick, as we're moving along here, if you have any questions, please stop me and ask. As we start diving into a little more into the background of this, there's a lot more to cover. There's a lot more in-depth discussion. So another thing I wanted to touch on with your behavior, and again, coming out of the security department, we look for things. We look for ways to justify adding things. One of the things with collecting this data and utilizing this data, you have the ability to do a couple things with it. One is a regression analysis where you can do resource planning. If you have more and more and more instances where incidents are coming up, or you're having more and more issues across the board, you can show over the course of the next several months, almost to years, with some significant accuracy that you're going to need more resources. Hardware. There is not an easier way to win over funding from budget than to be able to sit down and show that this is what we've seen, this is what we've modeled, this is our prediction, and it's going to get bad. Then you have classification. Again, your employee and insider threat behavior. Once they meet a certain threshold, there needs to be a point where they sit back and review, what is this user doing? Or what is this employee doing? Are they a threat? Do they have access to things they shouldn't? Are they sharing files that they shouldn't be? So the question comes in of how. How do we do any of this? It sounds great. It sounds awesome that we can turn on an algorithm, ingest the data, make sense of it, classify it, and poof, it wipes out a lot of the manual work. Well, one of the things about it, you have to establish a baseline for the user. If it's not abnormal for them to log in at 2:30 in the morning on a Saturday, then then whenever that flag's thrown, you know that that's within that user's normal baseline. That helps mitigate some of your false positives. I can't tell you the number of times I've had a false positive where somebody's reported, hey, so-and-so badged in at midnight on a Friday night. Well, that's because they forgot something or they're always there. Like we've seen over the last 6 months, every other Friday or the Friday before a major meeting, they're in the office. So it helps to reduce that response. But on the other hand, again, if the user's never badged in or is never online after a certain time and all of a sudden they're online pulling files, that's pretty clear we're going to start cutting access quick. And you catch that even before you lose a lot of data. And that's all on the baseline of user behavior. Attackers who enter a compromised credential or a compromised badge often are not detected because the behavior is not completely out of the realm of possibility. Again, we've seen things where, and I apologize, I come from the physical side more so, and we've seen where people have borrowed somebody's badge, and they're badging into places, and on the system it looks like somebody else is badging in, and that doesn't look out of place. But if you've lost your badge, and you go to badge in somewhere, and all of a sudden you're badging in at 1 o'clock in the morning, and that employee is not even, or is never in the office at 1 o'clock, that's a red flag. So by establishing a baseline for that employee or those users, it helps to determine and kind of amplify those issues when they happen, but it also helps reduce false positives. Again, leveraging employee history to determine if further analysis is warranted. Utilizing algorithms such as k-nearest neighbors, Bayesian, logistic regression, you have the ability to group things, to look for trends within your system. It really helps to understand what your users are doing instead of going out and asking. A user's never going to admit that they share files. I mean, basically they get caught sharing files on their personal Dropbox and they're like, oops, I'm sorry. But if you start seeing groups and things of that nature, you can preemptively do user education. Not just user education, sometimes it's even department education. Whereas marketing may not necessarily push that please don't share files like that on your own personal Dropbox. Or you take a preventative action and create a system where they can share those files and they don't risk losing them or don't risk data exfiltration. By using things like this, you have the ability to see that and kind of reach out. It takes a little bit of the scariness out of security. Again, like at the outset, I said that there's nothing worse than an adversarial relationship with the rest of the business. If they hate security, they're not going to want to do it. They're not going to want to play ball. They're not going to want to report things. They're not going to want to be part of the solution. They're going to think that you're there to tell them where they're wrong or fire them. I mean, typically when security comes knocking at the door, somebody goes, "What did I do wrong now?" And again, we're going to jump into the Apple case. I previously mentioned it. The thing about the Apple case, in January of 2019, there was an Apple employee working on the self-driving car effort was reported to his management for photos of sensitive intellectual property. So we're going to look back again. Let's we're going to look at this from two ways, I should say. The first way is the way a lot of agencies do it now, where they're not looking at the data. They're not looking at behaviors. They're not looking at any of that stuff. It's, hey, they just reported John for taking pictures of his laptop while working in the sensitive lab. Well, obviously that's a big red flag, and right there's your incident. So they go in and they talk to him. They find out, he's been taking photos for a while. During the investigation, it was determined that the individual had backed up his work laptop to his personal machine, and he had over 2,000 files containing confidential and proprietary materials related to the self-driving car program. Incidentally, this was also when they busted people for espionage, corporate espionage for the self-driving program. Now, here's where things get a little bit different. During the investigation, it revealed that the document theft began as early as June of 2018, right after he was hired. So even then, he was doing actions that didn't necessarily meet a threshold, but there was no analysis on what was going on. There was no analysis on the actions he was doing, when he was logging in, when he was in the facility. Again, like I had mentioned, badging in at odd hours. And he was also on a performance improvement plan for about 6 months prior to getting caught. At the point when he was actually caught taking the photos, he was actually due for an HR meeting to be terminated. So one of the things that we see here is that if you look at everything that was here, it seems like ever since probably June of 2018, there were flags along the way that, or data points even along the way, that indicated that there was an issue, that there was a threat. There was a high-risk employee working on a confidential project that worth millions. But it wasn't seen. It wasn't looked at that way. Now let's look at it from the other side. If we're monitoring and following up and using systems to look at those data points, you can already see that the very bottom point, he was on a performance improvement plan. That is a huge red flag. Not every single person on a performance plan is a red flag, but it shows that it doesn't have it in here, but actually in the article, some of the other things that he was noted in his web history of browsing job forums. He had applied for two or three jobs while on duty. Was uploading files to resume sites while at the office. None of that was captured. So by taking that data approach that we were previously discussing and looking at this, it would only take step 2 or step 3 before somebody in the security department, or even analytics is going, hey, why is he on job boards? Somebody check with HR and see if he's on a performance plan. I mean, everybody browses jobs at some point just to see what's out there. But there were red flags throughout his entire employment that indicated it was a threat. And it wasn't until after the data had been exfiltrated and they investigated and found it did they realize that there were all these flags. So the proposed solution, like I had previously mentioned, is to build a classification model where it takes into account physical factors when they're badging in, how often they're badging, is it out of the ordinary? Are they getting rejection? Are they trying to badge into a certain section of the company that they don't have access to? It could be as simple as, hey, I thought my badge worked on all doors, to maybe they're testing to see if somebody leaves it open. Combine that with user behavior and network traffic logs. Look at things like, hey, are they trying to badge into a secure area that they don't have access to, and they're posting stuff about how they hate their job. I don't know about you guys, but I know that there are a lot of companies out there that watch social media for their employees. When a employee begins getting disgruntled or stating things on social media like they would like to get back at the company for what they've done, that raises their threat. Because then you start looking at, do they have access to sensitive information? Then you start looking at things like, what's their network traffic? What are they saying? What are they doing? And you start being able to build that threat model. You start seeing a little more clear picture come in of, okay, maybe he's just having a bad day, but we need to look and see, is he working on anything that could cost us millions? There's where your cost savings comes in. It's not in a huge, it's preventing that data loss. It's preventing that project loss. And like I said, the last part of that is the badge records. Badge records will tell you tons about somebody. You've got somebody on a performance plan. You've got network logs where they're uploading work documents for jobs, and then they start showing up late for work. They stop badging altogether. There's a sudden increase in absenteeism. Then you start seeing red flags popping up where you probably need to check into it. Some of the challenges to bringing in a program like this: lack of expertise. Again, it's a huge challenge. You start talking analytics, and all of a sudden you think they have to go out and hire a data scientist for $140,000 a year. Not necessarily, not at all. C-suite leadership concerns. It sounds awesome on paper, but it's not necessary. There's concerns. They don't understand. Maybe your C-suite or your senior leadership just isn't bought into it yet. They don't quite understand the way you're mitigating things. And lastly is a make or buy solution. Again, if you have somebody in-house that has that ability to design and build this model and to collect that data, then by all means do that versus going out and buying an expensive product. I don't know about you guys, but Tableau is about $2,000 a license. And when you've got a very budget-conscious program, they don't particularly like to spend that much on one license. So again, the next part of this is, how do you sell it? The cost savings. This is where the title came in. We're not trying to terrify leadership. We're trying to reduce buying frivolous items. Boy, I thought that was going to blow up on me for a second there. You're trying to prevent from spending all this money in places you don't have to. There's no better way to preserve a security program than to find a way to cut costs but still provide the same service. We're not losing people. We're not losing programs. We're not losing access. We're not losing a service that we provide to them. But we're finding ways to reduce that overhead, to reduce that cost. That would be a huge win. If you look back at the Apple case, that would have been a huge win if their global security department had walked in and said, hey, he's been throwing red flags for the last 6 months. We just talked to his manager, and we need to have a conversation about what's going on. Staying ahead of the curve. Again, we can either be behind the curve where you're always reacting to an event. There's always a point in time where you find yourself looking at security and saying, how could I have stopped this? I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever had to do a CAPA corrective actions, preventative actions on an incident, sometimes it just feels like you're smacking yourself in the face going, well, this could have been prevented. Well, this is one of those methods for preventing it. Again, all this activity happens on a daily basis inside of an organization. There's no reason we can't harness that data to design a better program. Use the data that the individuals are creating to drive your security program. And lastly, again, driving your security program, every day employees generate tons and tons and tons of data, whether it's access, whether it's behaviors, whether it's, in some cases, how often they're badging at offsites. Like, there's tons of things that you can do to be kind of proactive. By utilizing analytics, we harness that data and the data exhaust to assess where our highest risk is. If you have five people that are working on a high risk project, your risk is pretty low. I kind of laughed about it. It doesn't make any sense to buy a new firewall or new anything if your users click on all kinds of links. Again, I go back to it makes crazy sense. There was a story, and I'll give you a little better example, where a marketing intern opened a email she thought was from the CEO. She thought, man, the CEO's emailing me. She needs me to take care of this, needs me to look this presentation over. Didn't even think twice about it. Opened it. She goes, that's funny. I don't remember having to sign into my email, but okay. Less than 3 hours later, the entire company was spammed from her email account, pushing out that same malware. So by utilizing, it doesn't do you any good to buy all this new awesome stuff if you're not looking at where your threat vectors are. And again, we reduce the cost and overhead by focusing on what matters and where our risk lies. Plus, it makes us look good when we can meet budget. I don't know if you guys have ever had to explain to a manager that, yeah, we went a little over budget. Well, how much is a little? About 40%. Minor details. And that pretty much covers it. Like I said, if you guys want to reach out to me, you can get a hold of me either way. And I wanted to make this more interactive. If you guys have questions, I know it was kind of a little different direction in terms of the business aspect, but that's the thing that you really have to look at, is that the way that the employees and the users behave indicates where your next incident is going to be. If they like to click links, if they like to, if your phishing campaigns or your training campaigns are constantly having high returns, that's probably a good indication that your next incident is going to be a phishing attempt with stolen credentials. If they're downloading random files off the internet, that's probably where you need to invest your next resource at. So instead of just throwing money at the problem and hoping that it solves itself, you're actually able to pinpoint that money that you do have and to create more value for your organization and for your department. And that's it, guys.